And of those 26 years, you were chief of police from 93 to 99. While you were chief of police, you and the police department gained national recognition for your pioneering work with community policing and with active assistance from the community. And you achieved a 40% reduction in crime while you were chief of police. The community did. Which is pretty extraordinary, 40%, okay, with the community. You reorganized the department, and I think really importantly is you incorporated more than 1,000 volunteers assisting the police department. And I got to say, one of those people volunteering to assist the police department today is my wife, Robin Dickerson, who is here somewhere. She was a minute ago. She ran out the room. Where are you, Robin? Oh my God, she ran away. Anyhow, she's a volunteer with the RSVP program, with the Retired Senior Volunteer Police Patrol, RSVP. Anyhow, you were first elected mayor of San Diego in 2005, and you're going to leave on December 1. December 3rd. Mayor, I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Well, I am really happy to be here. And the issue that you folks are going to talk about for this week is probably one of the most critical issues that we have faced over the past 20, 25 years, and it's not solved. And I don't know that it will be solved in the near future, but we can always lessen the harm. And one of the things that we did when we undertook problem-oriented policing or community policing when I was chief, and it continues, was that we knew we weren't going to solve every crime, but we knew if we could reduce the harm to communities and to families, that was at least as good as we could do, and perhaps you can have a far greater impact. And I think that's what you're going to be talking about, is how to reduce that harm to communities, how to reduce that harm to schools, how to reduce that harm to families. Probably we're not going to alleviate the problem altogether, but we can learn from each other. And I think that one of the things that I've learned over the past, and I've really learned it with Ambassador Shapiro and just in talking with Ambassador Brownfield a few minutes ago, is that the best solutions come from cooperation. The best solutions come from collaboration, and they involve talking with everybody who's a stakeholder in the issue. And what we found, we were most successful on any issue we tackled as a police department when we brought all the stakeholders in, when we brought the community members in, when we brought the schools in, when we brought a wide range of voices in, because there are a wide range of perspectives in everything we do. And when we came up with a solution, and it was a big group of people who were starting to push that forward, and I think that's really what helps you achieve what you're trying to achieve in these efforts at reducing the harm that drugs have caused in so many of our families. And I have to tell you, the harm that it causes in families, it's hard to even estimate, because there's that harm that comes from the family unit that's trying to struggle with somebody who you don't know how to help, who's sick, who it tears the fabric of the family apart. And then it just starts rippling through the community, and I think that's some of the most important issues that we face as we move through this. You know, I think that we have seen a tremendous reduction in crime in Tijuana on the Mexican side of our border, and I think that's been the cooperation between San Diego, between the federal level, the state level, on both sides, really working together on some of these issues that have really been so prominent over the last several years and are starting now to really settle in. And I admire the courage of the Mexican people. I admire the courage of them really stepping up and taking the issues and really taking a stand. And I know it's been tremendously costly on the Mexican people with the violence, but I think that they have done a tremendous job in staying the course. And I think that now where the United States needs to be is continuing to stay the course with all of our partners and making sure we're helping to fund some of the issues, but also listening and working together in a collaborative manner so that as we move forward, we can solve this problem for the hemisphere. Conferences like this are critically important when we try to work on those issues, because once again, we never solve anything by ourselves, because if you solve in one place, it creates a bubble that simply pops somewhere else. And I think that's one of the things that we see coming if we don't work on a collaborative strategy. I'm particularly pleased that Ambassador Brownfield's here. He understands this issue probably better than any of us. This has been his life's work. And while we each view it from a small piece, when you look at it from a larger piece, then I think we can start breaking off those pieces and starting to put together a strategy that will make sense all the way through. So I'd like to congratulate all of you. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of this conference, because I'm sure it's something that's going to be tremendously important for the world. So thank you very much.
Mayor Sanders is dodging questions by running off to another meeting that he had. So seriously, he's got a meeting. We knew this, and delighted to have the mayor here and to have him come as both the mayor of San Diego and as former chief of police of San Diego. Assistant Secretary William R. Brownfield is not just Assistant Secretary for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. He's a good friend of mine for, what, 25, 30 years, something like that. So a good while. Prior to taking his current job as Assistant Secretary, Bill Brownfield was U.S. Ambassador to Colombia from 2007 to 2010, where he worked extraordinarily closely with the government and is all of us, but through Ambassador Brownfield, I think, can take some great pride in the turnaround in Colombia and what happened in that country and is continuing. Bill Brownfield was also ambassador to Venezuela and Chile and has had a whole bunch of other jobs that he will tell you about if you're interested, some of which were interesting, some less so. But the toughest job he had was he had to follow me as ambassador to Venezuela, where he had to clean up the mess that I left there.
I left it working perfectly.
Actually, that's what I wrote here, is that you will notice that U.S. relations with Venezuela improved tremendously since when Bill Brownfield arrived. That's a joke. They were difficult. They continue to be difficult, and we'll see what happens on October 7th when they have elections there. So let me turn the microphone over to Ambassador William R. Brownfield. There should be, or there will be, Denise, cards for question cards. And did everybody get one, or they will get them, or? Yeah. So anyhow, you'll get the cards and fill them out, and that's how we're going to ask the questions and sort through them. You've got a better chance of getting your question asked if I can read it, and it's short and not making a long speech. So please ask him questions, and we'll see if we can get them answered. And let me turn this over. Bill, please.
I will first adjust a microphone so that it is for a human of normal height as opposed to a freakishly tall individual. I will thank the now departed, as in having left the room, not in any other sense, distinguished mayor of the city of San Diego, for his kind words at the start of this session. My thanks to Ambassador Shapiro, and the more I think about it, I believe, I believe I replaced you in the El Salvador desk in 1984, so that is 28 years ago. I don't know how that makes you feel. It makes me feel very old. And distinguidísimos representantes de los varios países que están participando en esta conferencia, muy buenos días. Ladies and gentlemen. At the end, not at the beginning. I acknowledge any right-thinking representative of the government of Brazil would speak some English and algo de español, porque lamentablemente mi portugués es muy limitado. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to tell a story, Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there were 7 countries located in a long isthmus between 2 large continents. And not that long ago, I would say about the 1970s, most of those 7 countries entered a time of tremendous violence and civil conflict. Historians will debate for many years the cause and blame for the violence, but there is no debate that the 1970s and 80s generated tremendous pressure in Central America, and particularly in the northern triangle of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, to flee to safety. Hundreds of thousands did so. Many came to the United States for safety and a better life for their families. As is usually the case in large migrant movements, the overwhelming majority were fine people who worked hard, educated their children, supported their families, and became leaders in their communities. Some did not. They did not integrate into the larger community. They did not adapt to the new culture and system. They organized themselves into groups outside their traditional structure and exploited their own communities through organized criminal activity. By the 1980s, they had organized, particularly in Southern California, into 2 large groupings, Calle 18, or 18th Street, and Mara Salvatrucha 13, or MS-13. Today, the FBI estimates that there are more than 7,000 18th Street members and 5,000 MS-13 members in the Los Angeles area alone. And you will find members in every major city in the United States, including San Diego. Is this an unusual phenomenon in U.S. history, ladies and gentlemen? Not really. In the second half of the 19th century, major cities on the East Coast confronted organized crime tied to the Irish immigrant communities. By the turn of the century, New York complained of a Jewish mafia grown from Eastern European migrants, and by the 1920s, most large cities in the U.S. confronted some version of the Italian mafia. The mafia has certainly not disappeared, but give 18th Street and MS-13 their credit, they have surged into the lead in terms of numbers. But the story continues, and it gets even worse. Here in the United States, we deport foreigners who commit violent crimes after they serve their sentences. I do not apologize for this. The American people never agreed to absorb the criminal population of the rest of the world. We have more than enough of our own. Thank you very much. But as we deported gang members back to the northern triangle of Central America in the 1990s and early years of this century, and without meaning or even realizing it, we sent seasoned criminals back to weak, vulnerable societies. Central America emerged from its nightmare only in the 1990s. They emerged with determination not to return to those dark days, but also with weakened legal, judicial, law enforcement, and corrections institutions. And into these vulnerable communities, thousands of criminals, seasoned by gang activities in the U.S., were inserted. Not surprisingly, they found the same security, status, and wealth in gang structures that had worked for them in the North. We estimate as many as 85,000 18th Street and MS-13 members today operate in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. They maintain their connections in the U.S. and throughout Central America, and the more entrepreneurial among them establish connections with the more sophisticated drug trafficking cartels headquartered in that large country located between Central America and the United States, Mexico. And that, ladies and gentlemen, finally brings me to the topic of today: youth, gangs, and drugs, breaking the cycle of violence and crime. We know the problem: tens of thousands of disaffected, uneducated, and poorly prepared youth, seeing little hope for a future in their traditional communities, band together in criminal organizations. They consume the product of the illicit drug industry. They facilitate the logistics and transportation for the trafficking industry in Central America and Mexico. And in the United States, they are a primary distributor and retailer of the finished product. We also know the outlines for the solution to the problem. Thousands of youth in the U.S. and Central America do not join gangs because of a genetic predisposition to be criminals. They join because they see the gang structure offering the best options for life at their age, facilitated by a substantial amount of peer pressure. History teaches that to break them out of the gang structure, they must be convinced of the negative consequences for remaining in the gang and the positive benefits for staying out, the carrot and the stick. Ladies and gents, I am the Assistant Secretary of State for Narcotics and Law Enforcement, sometimes referred to as the Drugs and Thugs Bureau. I am normally associated with the hard side, the security side of international drug abuse. So let me begin with the stick in this analysis. In 2008, at the same time the U.S. government announced the U.S.-Mexico Merida Initiative, we also announced an initiative for Central America. In 2010, this initiative matured into the Central America Regional Security Initiative, or CARSI. CARSI was and is paired with Merida because we realized that we cannot address the security and law enforcement challenge along the U.S.-Mexico border without also addressing Central America. And we cannot address the security, crime, drugs, and violence crises in Central America without addressing youth and gangs. Under FBI management, we support programs in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to address directly the criminal gangs. The program involves training and equipping police to perform anti-gang law enforcement. But we also share intelligence and databases. Let us remember that 18th Street and MS-13 have a large presence in both Central America and the United States. Personnel move back and forth. They communicate and coordinate. A phone call from a prison in El Salvador can be linked to a hit ordered in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, or San Diego. But every time they move, communicate, or coordinate, they are vulnerable. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is law enforcement, pure and simple. We also support policing at the community level because a better policed community is less attractive to organized gangs. In each country of the Northern Triangle, we support a model precinct program. In the most vulnerable and violent urban communities, we provide equipment, vehicles, training, communications, and social and economic programs for the community. In places like Mixco, in Guatemala City, in Lourdes, in El Salvador, we have seen crime rates drop dramatically. The Model Precinct program does not attack the gangs directly. It takes away the space where they can operate. We work with the three governments of Northern Central America to control arms flows. A criminal gang is bad. A criminal gang armed with automatic weapons is much worse. We realize that many weapons flow into Central America and Mexico from the United States. We also realize that the American people have been wrestling with the application of the Second Amendment for more than 2 centuries. But we have laws on the licensing and export of firearms that we can enforce. And by training and systems that help law enforcement track and identify data, we help law enforcement control the flow of sophisticated weapons to violent gangs. CARSI's 2 principal targets are violence and drugs. Gangs are tied to both. And while not all gangs are drug traffickers and not all drug trafficking is done by gangs, they are clearly connected. CARSI is very aggressive in attacking the flow of drugs through Central America. We have supported, trained, and equipped specialized anti-drug units throughout the Isthmus. We have provided anti-drug aviation capability to Guatemala, and hope to provide the same to Honduras. We are working intensely in the Caribbean and the Pacific to shut down maritime trafficking routes. We have strengthened laws and cooperation to attack illicit finance and money laundering. We are helping countries seize criminal assets and use them against those organizations. We are building cases and taking down the leadership of Central American drug trafficking organizations. Criminal gangs in Central America looking to make money from drug trafficking are finding a great deal of stick and not much carrot. Finally, we are working the often overlooked elements of law enforcement: prosecution, courts, correction systems. Efficient police coupled with inefficient rule of law and correction systems do not solve the gang problem. They merely recycle it. Under CARCI, we work with the judicial systems of most Central American countries to review and upgrade criminal codes to reflect the 21st century realities of gangs and drugs. We cooperate in efforts to upgrade and improve detention facilities, to meet international human rights standards, but also to ensure that prisons do not become extensions of gang headquarters. The International Law Enforcement Academy in San Salvador provides state-of-the-art instruction and training to police, prosecutors, and investigators on responding to criminal gangs and drug traffickers. But breaking the cycle of youth, drugs, gangs, and violence requires more than just the sanctions of aggressive anti-gang policing, better community policing, fewer firearms, effective counter-narcotics, and improved rule of law. Law enforcement sanctions are an essential element to breaking the cycle, but it is not the only element. There must be an effective alternative offered to the gang member, or he will not leave the gang. Part of the solution is education, prevention, and training. Youth with a basic education and an employable skill are not likely to join gangs. They do not need to join. They have better options outside the gang. In the past 2 years, we have worked with police in Central America to train more than 12,000 students through the Gang Resistance Education and Training, or GREAT program. We are on pace to double that number this year. The U.S. Agency for International Development is an essential part of our CARCI strategy, and wherever my bureau establishes a model precinct program, USAID establishes a community development program as well. I have visited them in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. After visiting a renovated police station, I visit the church, the community center, or the job training site where former or potential gang members are offered a better future. Local leadership is essential. Family participation is essential. Police support is essential. If the gang member does not see a job waiting at the end of the community program, he will return to the gang. Unemployment, ladies and gentlemen, is the lifeblood of the organized criminal gang. Another part of the gang solution is rehabilitation for those coming out of the gang structure. Before they can be educated or trained, they must learn how to function as productive human beings again. For the drug users, and this includes most gang members, rehabilitation starts with a clinical medical process to wean them off their drugs. For many, this process starts in prison. The prison, in fact, may be the first place where the community and society have access to a gang member and the opportunity to engage with the youth outside the gang structure. Of course, prison is not a resort hotel, but it must serve a larger function than simply exacting society's vengeance for crimes committed in the past. a rehabilitated gang member is less likely to commit the same crimes in the future. Finally, a public information campaign has to be part of the carrot for the criminal gang member. Public information is not just a bunch of posters hanging from telephone poles. To be effective, gang members must participate in the effort. They know what appeals to the youth gangs. They know how to reach them. Their participation becomes part of the rehabilitation and reentry into society. One reformed and successful former gang member is worth hundreds of outsiders in reaching and connecting with gangs. Ladies and gentlemen, I am obviously not nearly as old as Ambassador Shapiro, but I have recently crossed the threshold into my 60s. I am now old enough to remember fondly many of the lessons that my parents tried unsuccessfully to teach me 40 years ago. Youth will resist and rebel. That is what youth is all about. That is how we learn and mature. But the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow, and far too many of them are embedded in gangs in North and Central America. Our communities can isolate, bypass, and quarantine them. But if we do so, we fail as a society. For a society that cannot provide for its youth is a society guaranteed to fail. There is a way to break the cycle of violence between youth, gangs, and drugs. It takes years, but it took years for our societies to get into this situation. It takes clear and effective law enforcement, sanctions, because permitting criminal activity without consequences is an open invitation for more crime. But it also takes education, training, and employment, because a society that cannot provide a hopeful future for its youth is an unsuccessful society. I am an optimist. I believe we are on the right track. I believe this conference, its discussions, and the lessons you will learn here this week will move us further in the right direction. I personally look forward to the day when 18th Street is once again just a route to bypass the White House when you are trying to drive down to the mall in Washington, and MS 13 is the winning square on a giant bingo board. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Bill. Now, if you hold up the question cards, which I hope you've all filled out. Yeah? No? And somebody will collect those and pass them up here.
Do we have to just shut them out?
Or I can, and I'm going to start with the first question for you, Bill. And that is, there was a lot of press coverage about El Salvador, and the government I may not understand this correctly, to negotiate a truce between two gangs and the reduction of violence as a result. Can you talk about that a little bit, and did we have a role, I hope, or not?
I can and I will. Although I will begin my response by reminding everyone that I speak obviously for the government of the United States of America. I do not speak for the government of El Salvador, which is a sovereign government, makes its own policies and its own decisions. The truce issue was, in fact, something that was worked out directly in El Salvador between the government and its institutions, with the church serving as an intermediary with the two major gang structures of El Salvador, surprisingly enough, called Calle 18, or 18th Street, and MS 13, or MS 13, in El Salvador. The essence of the truce was that the gangs would stand down in terms of violence. They would stop killing people. They would stop engaging in violent crimes on the streets and in the communities, in exchange for which the government would, in essence, back off of their law enforcement sanctions and policing of the gangs. The truce has been in effect now for about 6 months. If you talk to 10 people, you will get 10 different opinions in terms of how successful the truce has been. The rate of violence and homicide is down dramatically. That is a good thing. There is some evidence that the gang leadership is actually enforcing the truce on its members, although that's not a universally good thing. Part of that evidence is gangs actually executing members of their own gang who either had or were on the point of violating the truce. But nevertheless, that is suggestive of a gang that is taking the truce seriously. On the negative side, there are those who are suggesting that the gangs are using this truce to acquire larger war chests, bigger arsenals of weapons, to reorganize themselves without having the pressure of police upon them, and to position themselves better for that moment when the truce comes to a conclusion. Other skeptics are suggesting that the truce in and of itself is not a solution if it does not lead to a permanent solution to the problem. Were we part of this process, Dr. Shapiro? The answer to that actually is no. We were aware of, we tracked, and were informed of how this process was evolving, but the decision was, in fact, a decision by the Salvadoran government, the Salvadoran gangs, with the church serving as an intermediary. Will it succeed? Watch this space.
What a surprise!
Both in the United States or in various countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'll choose this one as typical. Having lost the drug war, comma, what can be done to legalize the use of drugs? There's more discussion about that. President Santos talked about it, the United Nations. President Guatemala is talking about legalization. Uruguay, I think, actually has some legislation that's working its way through. What is the reaction of the government of the United States?
Well, you think I was in Southern California that I had to wait all the way until the second question to address the legalization issue. Ladies and gentlemen, let me set the parameters of my response first. I am the Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. I do not do domestic policy, domestic law, domestic enforcement. All of that is done by other institutions here in the United States of America in accordance with the laws and regulations established by those bodies created under Articles 1 and 2 of the Constitution of the United States. My job, what I am paid to do, is to address the drug, crime, law enforcement, and rule of law challenges outside of the United States. That is a rather clever way of me saying to you, I am not going to offer an opinion as to what the United States should do in terms of its own drug consumption laws, rules, and regulations. I will leave that to others. Outside of the United States, a U.S. government official cannot go far wrong in quoting the President of the United States. And he said in the city of Cartagena, Colombia, in April of this year, the following words, and this is very nearly word for word, although perhaps without the power, impact, and majesty of President Obama. He said, "Every country in this hemisphere is sovereign and independent and will make its own decisions, laws, and rules related to the consumption of drugs, including the question of legalization." He said, "We will not, from the United States, try to dictate the policy or the laws of other countries on this matter. any more than other countries will dictate what our laws and policies will be in the United States of America. He said, we welcome this debate. We do not discourage it, criticize it, or condemn it. We are happy to engage in this debate in international fora throughout the world. And finally, and fourth, he said, we have considered this matter in the United States of America, and we have concluded it will not work for us in the United States. Now, that is what the President of the United States said publicly and for the record in April of this year at the Cartagena Summit of the Americas. Ladies and gentlemen, it is highly unlikely that you are going to find me challenging or questioning the words of Barack H. Obama, who is, to the best of my knowledge, my ultimate boss here right now. I will offer only the following, perhaps two additional observations. One, while the President has stated publicly that we would welcome this debate, I would urge everyone here to remember there is no silver bullet solution to the drug problem. We spent 40 years getting into this problem. If there were a simple solution, people in this country, there are 312 million of us, probably would have figured it out over the last 40 years. Fine-tuning drug consumption laws and procedures may help, may hurt, may be good, may be bad, may be justifiable, may be unjustifiable. I think that is a legitimate debate for us to have, but I would urge you not to fall into the trap of concluding, golly, if only we were to legalize, this problem would go away. If it were that simple, ladies and gentlemen, they would have abolished my job 30 years ago.
Okay. I've been admonished to use the microphone so the interpreters can hear me. What opinion does the United States have concerning the challenges that incoming President of Mexico, Peña Nieto, faces combating organized crime there?
You notice he pushed the microphone back up to the 18-foot level. I'm bringing it back down to normal height once again. First, I'm allowed to say, for the second time today, a reminder to everyone here. I speak for the government of the United States of America. Obviously, I do not speak for the government of Mexico, or more correctly, the United Mexican States, and even less for the President-elect of Mexico, who is scheduled to take office on the 1st of December of this year. That said, we are in a position to, in essence, summarize where we are and expect to be at the time Enrique Peña Nieto takes office as President of Mexico. We have been involved in this Merida initiative, a arrangement, a program, a policy, a strategy whereby the two governments cooperate together to address challenges that affect both Mexico and the United States. And we have been working this initiative for 4 years. We have agreed that the initiative attempts to address 4 issues or pillars: attacking criminal organizations, building stronger institutions, strengthening the border between Mexico and the United States, and finally, building stronger and resilient communities, particularly those communities directly affected by drug trafficking and violent crime. I would submit we have had some considerable success. The United States government has dedicated, I believe, if my numbers are right, $1.8 billion to this effort over the last now 5 years, and the government of Mexico has dedicated $13 for every $1 that the United States government has invested in this effort. What have we seen? We have seen major drug cartels based in Mexico seriously decapitated, by which I mean their leadership has been taken out of operation through law enforcement operations. We have seen a substantial amount of equipment provided to Mexican federal law enforcement and prosecutorial institutions. We have seen the federal police of Mexico increased from a number of about 6,000 in the year 2007 to more than 35,000 today. And the perception of those police shifting from that of being, in essence, part of the problem to being part of the solution. We have seen some cities who have made tremendous progress in terms of reducing the violence and homicides in those cities. Some have names like Tijuana, which, when last I checked, was located about 10 miles, that would be 16 kilometers, directly to the south of where we are right now. Actually, we've come north of San Diego a bit, so maybe closer to 12 or 13, maybe even 15 miles south. The city of Juarez, across from the great state of Texas, has seen its homicide rate nearly halved in the course of the past year. We have, in short, seen a great deal of progress over the last 3 years. That said, the government of Mr. Peña Nieto has every right in the world, constitutional right, legal right, political right, and moral right to determine what his government's policies will be. He has stated publicly that he wants to continue to work closely with the United States of America and its government in addressing these problems that affect both of our peoples. I endorse that. I look forward to that sort of cooperation. I believe a new government, and I would remind you that on the 20th of January, the United States of America will also have either the beginning of a second term of the same president or a new president, and we will have a new Congress with some new members. This is a good time for both governments to pause, take stock, figure what has worked well over the last 4 years, what could work better, and how should we adjust this approach. That's my long-winded answer to the question. The bottom line is the Merida Initiative has delivered some positive results, but it's a good moment to pause and determine whether we should adjust it as the new government of Mexico and the results of the November elections in the United States come into play.
Ambassador Brownfield, that doesn't look good.
I'm trying to figure out how not to fall into your lap.
Yeah, don't. Yeah.
Unelegant and non-diplomatic manner.
First of all, this is a definitional question. Can you define what gang and gang activity is as opposed to crime that's not associated with gangs? What sort of programs is your bureau providing to national governments to fight gang activity as opposed to non-gang criminal activity? And what metrics do you use? And then associated with that, what in specific are we doing to prevent the formation of gangs along the U.S.-Mexico border where gang members from the U.S. are deported to Mexico?
Obviously, there's a lawyer somewhere in the group demanding a legal definition. Look, I'm not going to claim lawyerly knowledge. I will offer you my basic top-of-the-head, dumb kid from West Texas definition of gang as I am applying it in this conversation and this discussion. A gang would be a grouping of human beings, given what we're talking about today, overwhelmingly young, who participate in an organized way with an organized structure in criminal activity. Now, are there gangs that are not criminal? Sure, I suppose when I was a kid, I presume when we were all kids, we had our what we euphemistically referred to as a gang, and what we really meant was a group of friends who liked to hang out together and probably did a certain amount of mischief. That is not what I mean by gang. Would a highly sophisticated network of sophisticated criminals organized together constitute a gang? Yes, I suppose it would, but that is not what I am talking about. For the most part, I am talking about disadvantaged, undereducated, unemployed, and to a certain extent unemployable youth who gather together, organize a structure, and engage in criminal activity, whether for financial gain or, in essence, as some form of social activity. That is what I have been trying to address in terms of our anti-gang programs overseas and specifically in Central America, not in the United States, because, reminder, I do international narcotics and law enforcement. If it's within the 50 states, I don't do it. That is local law enforcement, FBI, DEA, and any other element of our domestic law enforcement that does it. Do we have programs that are directly focused at the U.S.-Mexico gang structure? Yes, although may I suggest to you that it is a slightly different challenge than that we have been dealing with MS-13 and 18th Street. These gangs tend to be, the U.S.-Mexico relationship tends to be concentrated on the border and tends to be focused on a specific bit of criminal activity, and that is the movement and subsequent distribution of illicit drugs across the border from Mexico into the United States and then introduced into a larger retail distribution system. The big gangs, the MS-13s and the 18th Street gangs, are far broader than that and are not even in all cases involved in drug trafficking. They are more troublesome for us, ladies and gentlemen, because they are so massive, because we can literally say any large city in the United States of America has some Central American gang presence. The U.S.-Mexico border gangs are concentrated on the border. These larger gangs are far more national in scope and engage in much greater activities. What are we doing to address the problem? In a sense, it's another version, but in a global sense, of what I was describing to you in my powerful, bold, and stirring presentation. We're trying to attack the problem both on the hard side and the soft side. The hard side means building police capacity to address, challenge, and eventually take down the gang structures, convincing the gangs that they will eventually be sanctioned if they do not dismantle or at least cease criminal activity. That's the hard side. And then the soft side is build credible alternatives for them. Education, job training, rehabilitation, reinsertion into society, the possibility of having a life and a productive life outside of the gang structure. In some way or another, that is our program in every country in the world where we are supporting anti-gang activities. By the way, that's far broader than just Central America and Mexico. It also includes the Caribbean. It includes West Africa. And believe it or not, we're even doing it in some Middle Eastern countries. And every country is different. Every gang is different. But the approach, maintain sanctions on the hard side, offer credible alternatives on the soft side, is the same everywhere in the world.
Bill, I've got a handful of questions. Let me, thank you.
Is that it for
That's it. That's it. Yeah, I've got a handful of unasked questions, but you've got a program and other things to do and a plane to catch.
I have a plane to catch.
So,
planes wait for no man.
So I want to thank you very much for meeting with us this morning. We're going to have a coffee break now. And I want to thank Qualcomm, who has helped us with this coffee break. And we're going to get a short message from Qualcomm right after the coffee break. We're breaking until 10:30. Is that correct, Lee? Breaking until 10:30. Till 10:30. Ambassador Brownfield, on behalf of the Institute of the Americas, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you all very much. Que tengan buena conferencia.
Was that Portuguese?